Good afternoon, coaches. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming back from the session. We hope certainly that you've had a meaningful past 1.5 days of learning and interacting with one another. So we have now our panel discussion. So all the questions that you've been burning inside you, this is the time to answer them. So if you do have any questions, you can just raise your hands, and my colleagues will bring the mic to you so that you can ask those questions directly to the panelists. Otherwise, the Slido is also available for you, and some of you have already posted those questions, and feel free to put in your questions there. Yeah? So the panel, as you can see, no stranger to us after yesterday. Haley, Brandon, and Peng Xiong have already delivered their keynote presentation, some thought-provoking things for us to think about, certainly. But we do have an additional member on the panel, and that is Missy Ping Siu. Can we put our hands together for Ping Siu, please? Again, Ping Siu is no stranger to us, and congratulations on your recent success, the double gold medal at the World Para Championship. So, well done. And of course, as you know, she's also a nominated member of parliament. So one of the things, as you have read from our conference materials, is about this idea of inclusivity and differentiation. And she has been very vocal in that area of inclusiveness. So we thought it would be very good for us to hear from you, your perspective and your thoughts as an athlete, as to what we need to be thinking about to be a lot more inclusive, what coaches need to be thinking about when we're dealing with athletes or different abilities. Yeah. So with that, Peng Xiong, you have something to say? Oh, Peng Xiu, we'll let you open if you want to open and say something for a start.
Hi everyone. Thanks for still being around. And yeah, like what Azhar said, it's really my pleasure to be here today to share with all of you what I feel can be a bit more inclusive when it comes to para sports in general. And I think I have a lot to learn today as well, so I'm looking forward to this session.
Thanks, Ping Siu. So Brandon, if I can just start with you, because you did the first keynote, and you talk about the concept of Horizon 1 and Horizon 2. And that is something I think resonates very well with, certainly for me and the coaches here. And sometimes coaches are given KPIs that are tagged to Horizon 1. So it becomes sometimes a dilemma. So how would you suggest we reconcile the fact that, yes, I have the Horizon 2 in sight, but yet I have to meet these Horizon 1 KPIs?
Yeah, thanks, Azhar. It's a big question, certainly for the coaches that I work with. In some ways, one of the responses coaches make is they kind of know that they have two stories they have to tell. They have to tell the story to sponsors, to funders, to the public, which is often the Horizon 1 story. But the story that binds the group together is often the Horizon 2 story, the story of the nobility, the group trying to be great, the learning about being good men, good women, contributing to their families. And so in some ways, I see dual narratives as a response inside some clubs and some coaching setups where, let's be clear, we have to answer Horizon 1, we can't do anything about that, that's how we're measured sometimes, but let's not lose sight of the deeper thing of the story that makes sense of the place to us. And so in many ways it's like two accountabilities, Azhar. It's the accountability out to the funders, it's the accountability into the sort of meaning of the group. I think where the groups that I've worked with that get into trouble is they either only want to talk about Horizon 1 because it's what they're measured on, and then they get very short term and under pressure, then the commitment to community and the commitment to family and the commitment to the country that also holds the group together, they lose sight of that, and that makes the work really hard to sustain. So they end up with kind of narratives to both.
And Just a follow-up question to that, something that one of the participants asked. What do you think, therefore, are the priorities for the next generation of leaders and coaches, or the 21st century leaders and coaches in sport?
Well, younger people, millennial, post-millennial, whatever you call younger people, everybody's younger to me now. Younger people are attuned to social impact and values in a way that when I was 20, 21, 22, I didn't really have the same connection to social impact thinking that the younger people seem to have now. And they expect to be brought into a club, to be brought into a program that has meaning, that has brand value, that has connection to their values, that gives them a sense that they're doing a social good. So the younger generation have to be led in a different way to previous generations. I think that's an attribute, that's a quality of younger people, and I think we have to honor that quality. So then, who will the next generation of coaches be? As this generation becomes coaches, as this generation of younger people become coaches, it'll be a different world. The world is changing in front of our eyes, and if you think it's fast now, this is the slowest it's going to be. You know, what's coming behind this and behind that and behind that will be even faster again. So we think it's complex now. We think that we've speeded up now. This is the slowest. We'll look back on 2019 as the good old days when things were quiet. And yet most of us are experiencing 2019 as a very fast, very sort of furious times. So who will that generation of coaches need to be? They're going to have to be better at handling complexity than they are at handling complication. So complication can break things down into simple pieces and solve the pieces. Complexity, it can't be broken down. It has to be like surfing, you have to just handle it. You have to find new technologies, new ways of thinking to handle complexity. The notion that you can be mechanistic about this future, the mechanistic mind won't solve the things that we're going to have. It'll be an integrated mind. It'll be I hope I'm not talking at an educator's level, as if I was an educator here, but your mindset will have to be much more adaptive and fluid, and much less rigid and static. It'll be less about content than it will be about process. Young people are there already. Many young people are so brilliantly connected and integrated, have greater system depth and pattern depth. And I think the next generation of coaches will be those coaches matured, those people matured. I hope that the times that they meet with that mindset will still be sort of recognizable enough for them to handle those questions. But they'll be different people to us. They'll be leading in a different way to the way we were taught to lead. I'm 60 years of age. Anybody of my generation was taught to lead in a different way to the way young people will need to be led. Much more collaborative than fixed state. Sorry, it's a long answer. Every answer won't be that long.
But very good answer. Thanks for that.
I'm trying to encourage him not to ask me any more questions.
But thanks for that. And I think it leads to what Haley shared about, or the question that you posed to us, right? Knowledge, skills, experience, is that enough? And we here in Singapore have been encouraging our coaches to be reflective practitioners, and asking that question has been really timely. So what therefore is needed to complete the picture of this good coach, or the 21st century coach that we hope to see in future? What would your response be?
Good question. I think the reflective practice is really where we need to be. I was asked a question yesterday in the workshop when we talked about problems, interests and gaps as a way of almost reviewing what we do on a constant basis, and I was asked, how often would you do that? And my answer was every day. And I do that every day on the basis of that's how I look at myself. Have I found another problem? Have I found an interest? Is there a gap? And I think if we begin to look at ourselves in that way, and if we can encourage other coaches to constantly be looking to see if we can improve, that's how we will get coaches to be better, and that's how we will end up better. But if we don't do that, we'll stay
Selected
where we are.
FDWs undergo
And when we
a higher
stay
level
where
of
we are, we
infant or elder
effectively go
care training
backwards.
if you have family members who need such care.
Interesting.
You also have a
That
dedicated
brings
team
me
of
the question
counselors whom you can
that's,
rely on to
has
resolve
come up
any issues you may have
related
for
to what Peng
FDW.
Xiong said just now, this morning
Nation,
rather, about
your
the
solution
US
for
coach
quality and
Phil
reliable
Hensel.
domestic
So he
household
was coaching on a
services.
wage of,
Contact us today.
if I get this right, $14,000 a year. So it's not a lot. There must have been something that sustains him as a coach. Certainly not the money, not the wages. So what is something that will sustain coaches, coaches in the past and moving forward, coaches in future as well? What were some of the things that sustain coaches and sustain you?
Well, he was actually the first president of the American Swim Coaches Association. And I think, again, he started off with the passion of coaching. He started the swim school a lot earlier, Phil Hensel Swim Academy. And with his student base from the Learn to Swim program, just to share an example, if you break it down to per hour, the students could say if you're working off $100 a month of fees, it's about $25 an hour once a week, versus a competitive program, you can have 20 hours a week, so it may be about $1 an hour to the coach. So in order to sustain that, you need a model that is, sufficient enough to sustain the interest in competitive coaching, because you're not going to make money from competitive coaching unless you get sponsors. Again, a good example in the current model is the professional league. They just started the ISL, International Swimming League, and they have clubs that has big sponsors, and they're recruiting swimmers from around the world to represent their clubs, and they're paid a stipend. So I think there are different ways of approaching it, and I strongly believe that in the area of coaching, you need to have the sustenance. And Learn to Play programs is a good way of funding that passion in competitive coaching. And going back to just the 21st century of coaches, with the 5G technology, it's going to be even faster. The advancement is going to be huge. I don't think people of my age, will be able to keep up with it. But I think this is where we kind of pass the baton. But I think at the same time keep some of the traditional form of coaching, which again you cannot run away from, and that's through hard work. There's no shortcut. Yeah, even no matter how much you access the internet or information and all that, it all boils down to putting in the hours of excellence.
Thanks for that, Peng Xiong. But if I recall, you said earlier that you'll be still coaching when you're 80 years old, right? So,
Well, 6G, yeah, 7G. Again, I think one has the opportunity to contribute regardless of their age. And I think a good example was Phil Hensel. He was coaching until in his 70s. My dad was still teaching and coaching even in the 70s. And I believe there's this legendary coach for Jisuli. Zender, Patrick Zender. He's still coaching, and that is the legacy of a good coach. And I think there's always something to share and to also learn. Like I said earlier on, the younger ones are going to be the ones that are going to be better informed. And again, that's the opportunity for us to pick up. And I think as a coach, we must always remember that we must always keep an open mind and learn.
I second that as well. Thanks, Peng Xiong. Peng Xiu, you see the direction in which this is heading, yeah? So you are next. I must say that I saw you making that speech in Parliament. And one of the things that you said really sort of impacted me. And you said the phrase, "Let us put ability before disability." And Coach SG, we kind of stole that and we put a hashtag, "Putting ability before disability." Just wanted you to share what is your own personal vision of inclusiveness in Singapore.
That's a very big question because there are so many different areas that we can be inclusive in. But I think for now, like if I were to reference that speech, it would really be for more, like the main point now is really for more coaches to take in, to understand what para swimming is, para sports is about, and not be afraid to venture into it. I think many people are afraid of the unknown. So if you don't know about something, say for example, if you've been coaching able-bodied people your whole life, and if I were to give you somebody with a disability now, you would just be very unsure of what to do. You wouldn't know if it's going to be the same way or to do something completely different. Yeah, so if you are unsure about it, if you don't know about it, the more you wouldn't take that student on. But if people start to open their mindsets, if they are more open to students of all abilities, then there's a higher chance that this field that has not been growing very fast will grow faster eventually. Yeah.
So, what would that future look like if you were to envision the future where it is truly inclusive? What would that look like?
So I think one thing that would make me think that it's starting to go in the right direction is we have a wider base of athletes. Because like it's a triangle, we need a broader base of athletes at the bottom before we can find the top few that are elite eventually. And now I think the base can be a bit broader. There can be more athletes coming forward. And if I start to see the increase in the numbers there, I think we are in the right direction.
All right, thanks. I think we certainly are seeing a lot more. And I think what we are seeing also is a growth in inclusive sport or play inclusive, as you know, where able and disabled people are playing together. And I think that's a positive, certainly. But if we think about being inclusive, it is not just about with including persons with disabilities, and it's also recognizing that in our own groups where seemingly they are normal but able-bodied, but there are differences in ability, and we have to be inclusive, isn't it? So how do we go about having that mindset that we need to constantly think about making it inclusive, particularly as the workshop has talked about the idea of the invisible disability, those with special needs, those with learning disability that you can't really tell just by looking at that child. So what are your thoughts in terms of what a coach should do and must do? Haley first?
I think in the area of coach education, I think certainly in Ireland we have changed how we deal with inclusiveness. Years ago we were asked by the disability sports to have a separate section for the disability awareness, which we did, and then they decided that wasn't working. So then it was almost like fully integrated into the able-bodied sports, and that seemed to not work either. So what we have now is that it almost like what we're really looking for. I think it's in everything. So whether it's an able-bodied sport, whether it's in the disability sports, every task that we do in any of the sports always has a disability element to it. And the other thing, and I was just mentioning it to Troy actually there just over lunch, some of the primary school programs, which are not necessarily sport programs, but they're almost like a problem-based learning for primary schools. So a lot of those now have actually got a disability element in them. So they're actually, the kids now are growing up not with disability as something that's different. It's just an everyday occurrence. And I think between a schools program and the sports programs, hopefully, I would say in the next 10 years, the generations growing up, there will literally be no difference. Everybody will have, maybe not an expertise in inclusiveness, but they certainly won't be afraid of it, and it will be able to be brought into everything that we do without too much problems. And I think that's where, certainly in Ireland, we're heading, and I would suggest that's something that is a good model.
If I can just add to that. I think just recently, USA Swimming, they've merged with para swimming. And again, that's a really wonderful thing that's happening. And then you have the Commonwealth, Charter or the Commonwealth Games having some of the para sports involved in the games. My exposure with the Paralympics was an eye-opener. It actually inspires you at a different level because you can see individuals with different disability, but they're no different from the other athletes who are pursuing the passion for the sport. And I think you just need that opportunity and exposure to present themselves. But I think the difficult part is always the first step of encouraging them to come out and just play. Now I'm working with an individual in his 40s, similar to Ping Siu's condition. He found out he had muscular dystrophy at the age of 20, and then for 20 years he just stayed out of the water. He was a swim coach. So after 20 years, somehow faith has it that we get to meet, and then we kind of encourage him to just get into the water and just swim a few laps. And now he's just training. In fact, after this, I gotta go and help him. So I think if a coach is enlightened with the coach education part of it, they definitely can make a big difference in integrating para sports into their program.
Brendan?
Well, obviously, as the person who's coming from outside the sport, the word you've just used, Benjamin, is enlightened. That, to me, inclusion is an attitude, it's a disposition. Before it becomes positional, it has to be dispositional. Before it becomes structure, it has to be attitude. And in education, for example, what would a classroom be if everyone didn't belong in it? What would that be? There wouldn't be a teacher in the world who's not trying to create a space where every child who comes across that threshold knows that they're safe and that they belong there. In terms of inclusion, if you look at an island from above the water, it's separate from other islands. That's just a perspective from above the water. If you go down beneath the water, you'll find a place where the islands are all connected. And I think it's a matter of where we focus. Because if as people we want to focus on our difference, of course the difference is there, we have different things, but you must always remember that beneath the surface, different religions, different races, like forget inclusion at the level we're talking about it, think about inclusion as a basic premise. As human beings, beneath the surface of our difference is what we have in common. That we come on this planet, we live as well as we can, and then we pass through and we leave as best we can what's important to the people behind us. And so, to be honest, I think it's a matter of where we put our attention. If we put our attention on what's the same, and you said you meet the athletes and you realize, so we're not Paralympians and able-bodied Olympians, we are people who love the water. We're people who love to swim. And so okay, there's a connection. Let's go from there. And it's not to deny differences or that we have to compensate or allow and plan for differences, of course, but never forget the things we have in common. We're people, and the world needs in many ways, what bigger value does the world need at the moment than the ability to sort of include each other as opposed to separate each other? I mean, at all levels. And when you're in politics, I mean, to bring the peoples of the world together, I mean, inclusion is right on the money at the moment.
Xiu, your further thoughts?
Yes, I think when you say what I envision inclusion to be at the end of the day, it's what like many countries are already merging their, not say merging, but they're taking para sports under their association. So like in the UK, in Germany, in Australia. So I think that I hope to see us moving in that direction as well, because there's a lot more resources in coming together and working together. It's a lot more efficient, and hopefully one day we'll see it. Yeah.
I think that's already starting. So Sport SG has already done that work with SDSC, having some sports that will be merged between able and disabled. So it's just one and the same now. But there's still a lot more to do. And yeah, that's something we look forward to. All right, I'm going to give an opportunity now for the audience to ask their questions. Anyone? If not, I'm gonna, yep, Mr. K, yes. They're running to you, Mr. K. Yeah.
You know, we were talking about the situation many years ago, like during Peng Chong's time, and how people did it out of passion, etc., etc. But that situation cannot apply now. Why? Now it's about money. You cannot run away from it. The first flat that we bought from the HDB, it was the best HDB flat at that time because it had 3 bedrooms for the first time. And the rent was $126 a month. 2 years later, HDB, the Housing Development Board, came out with a scheme of selling flats. And they told us, those of you who are here, we are going to sell this block of flats. If you don't want to stay here and buy it, we will give you alternative accommodation. But if you want to buy this flat, it's $12,000. The best HDB flat, $12,000. That same flat, people are selling for $400,000. And so, we must have the resources. We cannot expect our coaches to work for passion. The money must be there. And so we must do all we can. I don't know who is responsible for it. So that our coaches are paid well.
Thanks for the question, Mr. K. We shall vote you to be the next president, maybe? Yeah.
I'm 77. I won't have many more years left.
But that's a good question, certainly. Responses from the panel?
Probably from a local perspective. My dad got his at 7,000, 5-room flat in the 70s. And it's still, spacious, and I think that's the best thing that's ever happened to our generation of Singaporeans, and the wisest thing that the government to have done. I think as we put in perspective, when I was asked to be the national head coach, I told them, how much are you willing to pay for the next person to come in and take up that position? And I think the figure was decent enough and respectable that it allows that succession. I think that's the key thing. And now I think it is time to recognize our coaching profession and to instill some level of professionalism. As a private sector, I think, like I shared the model, we are able to sustain it through the learn to play. But again, I think swimming is fortunate because many of the parents would want their kids to learn how to swim. But other sports, I think we have to be more creative and imaginative. And a good example is Z fencing. I think they've done a really good job in commercializing it. And they're paying, I think, the coaches well enough. So I think that, I mean, if parents are willing to pay the kids to attend tuition classes and pay $1,000 a month, you know, why not the coaches? Yeah.
Thanks for that, Beng Siong. The situation in Australia and Ireland?
I'm not sure us sharing Australia and Ireland's much used to in Singapore, but it is the same in Ireland. I coach almost 30 hours a week and I don't get paid a jot, even though it's a high performance squad. I've got 5 Olympians in the squad at the moment, over 20 odd national records in the squad, and I don't get paid a jot, nor does my husband who I coach with, but the physio gets 20 grand a year, of which they see once every few weeks. So I share your pain. I am looking within Ireland to see if we can just professionalise the coach, so you can actually have a profession as a coach. I don't think we're at the stage in Ireland where it would be fair to say that everybody has to be a professional in order to coach. But I think that is the only way to go. I think certainly if I said to somebody that I was retiring from coaching and is someone going to take on my squad, but by the way, you're going to put in 30 odd hours a week for 52 weeks a year and you're not going to get paid anything, I don't think there've been many people knocking on my door.
So the situation in New Zealand, where I do most of my sport work, is very mixed. Top 5 sports coaches are professional and really well paid. Every other sport then, coaches are passion and low pay for long hours and expected. In many ways, their passion is used against them in some ways because, you know, the fact that people know you will still do it, even if you're not being paid, makes the case that why would we pay you? Then the question starts to arise over time of the impact on coaches' families of the work they do for other people's families. And that's where the welfare stretch starts to come in, the well-being stretch starts to come in for coaches. That I'm spending 30 hours, 20 hours a week coaching young people, and I've got 2 young people at home who wish their dad or their mum was home more often. And so coaches are beginning to ask that question. I think and it may be naive, guys, you're in the sporting profession and I'm not, but if what you're saying about yourselves in your literature, about your social impact, about your benefit to Singapore, about the fact that you reach disadvantaged young people and disadvantaged communities and connect people and maintain social cohesion, if that's Horizon 2, I wonder, would businesses and government, if they were convinced of that, would they start to fund us differently? Because if they're funding better health outcomes for Singapore, if they're funding better social outcomes for Singapore, if they're funding programs that, if businesses wanted to be philanthropic and support Singapore, and they said, well, we should support coaches because coaches is the place where we reach these kids. I don't know if there are different funding models and possibilities, and we've heard one, like you can go privatize, you can corporatize it yourself and do very clever. But I wonder if we're making the right case as to the value of coaches. Because if all that people are paying attention to in our case is Horizon 1, number of training sessions, the number of wins. You know, if all the people are paying attention to Horizon One, maybe we'd be paid differently if people realised how much of a contribution we make to Horizon 2, not just for sports but for the country.
Thanks for that. I know you're flying back tonight, Brendan, but just on that response, we might just bring you back to speak to people in higher places in Singapore so that they can hear that. Yeah. Ping Siu, any thoughts?
I agree that we can't live on passion. Yeah, and sorry. But I think at the end of the day, that's important. I know there are a few, but very, very few coaches at the top, they get paid how much they want to get paid. And then there are the rest at the bottom who have to slowly find their way up. But at the end of the day, I think it's just the nature of this role. It's a very, something you do because you enjoy, something you do because you want to make a difference. And I don't know, maybe up to you lah. See what Coach SG can do.
All right. Yes, I saw the Tai Chi coming my way. We'll certainly bring it up. I will Tai Chi back to you since you're a nominated member of parliament. But I think we're in this together. It's really about collaboration, and really, I like your response, Brendan. And I think a lot more people need to hear. A lot more people in higher places need to hear about this, and therefore, we together improve the sports coaching ecosystem and the sports, not just sports coaching, but the sports ecosystem here in Singapore.
Just to share, I just met someone outside, Malcolm Chen. Yeah, he's over there, 70 plus, and still coaching, and out of passion. Yeah, so he's coaching cycling. So again, he's running a social enterprise, non-profit. Yeah. So again, I think there are dedicated coaches out there, but I think we just need to figure out how to make it a viable industry for them to continue their passion. Like I say, if we do get people in their 70s and 80s still wanting to go get involved in coaching, there needs to be an avenue. Yeah, and especially with the aging population, I think it will go well with the system.
Yeah, agree.
I have something else.
Sure. Yeah.
And I know like learn to play coaches can get quite a substantial amount. So at the end of the day, I think it's also how you want to do it. You can be a competitive coach, and I know at a competitive level you don't earn as much. But then I know it's a lot. It's very time consuming. But if you really want to do it, then you can find other ways to supplement your income. So it's also a mindset where you tell yourself you can do it rather than always saying that I cannot lah. Yeah,
Yeah, agree. Yeah. Mr. K, see what you've done. From the housing question, but thanks for that. Yeah. Any other question?
How many of us look for passion at 30?
How many of us look for passion at 30?
For pay per session. I don't look for passion, sorry. Because somebody needs to put food on the table.
I think that's something that we talked about just now as well, right? We need to be thinking about families. Okay. Hanson, you got a question?
Yeah, this is related to both these gentlemen, Mr. K and Yua, and Gan, right? So what we saw earlier from Peng Siong's presentation was, at least for me, was that he could align his passion with doing good for himself, his business, and doing good for others also. So I think that's something that a lot of us coaches aspire to do as well. And one of our speakers, John Sito, he once told me that to do good for others, you must first be able to do good for yourself. So I would like to ask Peng Siong, for coaches trying to fulfill all these criteria, do good for myself, live my passion, and do good for others. what would your advice be?
Well, I think if you look at the simplicity of it, going back to the basics, why do you do it? And I can share with you that I spent hours in the pool just doing nothing. In Farrer Park pool, when I was young, I would actually dive to the bottom of the deep pool and start looking for treasures. And I do get once in a while earrings, chains, but of course I got to give it to my dad. And even when I was in my teenage years, after training at ACS, I'll still go back to Farrer Park and just spend hours in the pool just warming down. So my attachment to water has been so close since I was a young kid. And even now, I still do masters swimming just to keep myself inspired by someone that is 80 years old, 90-year-old lady swimming and breaking a world record. So that's my source of inspiration. And I think what my dad went through, so I didn't want to see the, downside of it, because he was just giving, and people would take advantage of it. And I think the model where Phil Hansel started the swim academy, that makes sense, when I wanted to do something with the sport. So I was fortunate enough to be able to put it together and then still be able to give back. So if you look at it, in Japan, I think their lifestyle, their culture is very simple. You call it the Zen way. And once you want to master a skill, they'll dedicate their whole life just to acquire the skill. And that is the kind of skill acquisition that one would dedicate themselves to. And I think that was from my dad, going to Japan, learning judo, and then putting it into what he enjoys doing. So I suppose is going back to basics, understanding why you're doing it, and then keeping to it. And there's nothing wrong with just teaching, learn to swim, or learn to play, but be the best that you can be in that. Then when opportunity comes for you to step up, take on the challenge.
Thanks, Beng Xiong. Balas?
Thank you. May I have a question towards the coaches who are not doing it because of passion, and at the same time they are saying that they are underpaid? My question is, why are you doing this? Why don't you do something else if you don't really like it and you are underpaid at the same time? Can I have an answer for this?
So you want everyone to answer now? Okay, let's do a quick poll. But that's a very interesting question, isn't it? I think we acknowledge that. If you are underpaid and you're not passionate, or even if you're passionate and you're underpaid, then why are you still doing it? There must be something in there for you and what you're gaining or getting out of it. Yeah.
It's a really good question, because if you feel that you're undervalued and you're not recognized and it's not what you want to do something else.
Yep.
We don't need more coaches, we need better coaches.
Yeah. I second that. Thanks, Hansen. Yeah. And I'm sure he's not saying it because he's in Coach SG, but yeah, if we know Hansen, we know how passionate he is about his sport. Yeah. All right. Is there another question? Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan. I have more of a comment than a question. So there are many different levels of coaching in Singapore, isn't it? And whatever the sport that you're at. And as Pinsu alluded to, it all starts with a triangle. And the biggest base of that is at the community level. So my boys, I've got 3 kids. 2 of them go to football every Sunday. And at the community level, the coaches, I would say definitely it's hard because they have to think about how much they are paid with. And then at the same time deal with the horizon to the nobility and the cause of the sport that's supposed to unite and bring people together. So that's one thing that they have to deal with. The coaches that come, sometimes they come for a few sessions and then the coaches get replaced. So you can more or less get the sense of perhaps there are more important things to do, or perhaps the money isn't good enough to sustain them coming. So that's something that's really important to think about. But at the same time, these coaches that work at the community level are so important because they are the ones that touches the lives of the young ones, the ones that spread what sport can give to individuals. So it's a really hard thing to deal with. I think we have to find as individuals a balance between our passion and, as what Pinsu said, what brings food to the table. It's definitely a hard thing. I mean, look at all of us, the ones that are still here. Kudos to all of you, because the hall was full on the first day. But of course, practicality calls. At the same time, whilst it can get tough, don't forget the noble cause of coaching. I think, that's just a comment that I wanted to bring up.
Thanks, John. Comments or responses to that?
I coach because I think I'm reasonably good at it. I think I can make a difference, and I think it's something that I do, and I do it well. And there's something inside me, maybe the way I was brought up, that if you're good at something and it can help somebody else, then you should do it. And even though I would like to be paid for it, if it comes to a choice of, well, you can either do it and not get paid or not do it at all, I will still do it.
Thanks, Haley.
Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, it's a balance. Like, you can have a very high-paying job and not be happy at your job, or you can do what you do, and like this kind of work, it feeds your soul, it makes you happy. Like, as an athlete, I am so grateful for all of my coaches. They have made me into who I am today, and they really made a difference in my lives. So if you want something like this in your lives, then stick to what you're doing, and be happy with what you have.
Thanks, Ping Xiu. Thanks for that, coming from an athlete. Yeah, Ping Xiu.
Well, I think coaches, or at least most I know, are very creative, very imaginative, because you come up with all sorts of ways to encourage your students to do well. So be creative about how you can strike that balance in terms of remuneration and how you're getting paid. Again, sometimes it's always good to find a position that pays well, and then during your free time, contribute those hours to coaching someone that needs the extra help. So I think, again, that's the beauty of coaching. You guys are creative, you guys are imaginative. Use those resources to get the best out of it.
Thanks, Vishal. Brendan, you got a comment?
Just conscious that I'm not a coach. I mean, I've coached my son's football and things like that, but I'm not a coach in the same sort of way that you are. I don't know how you work without passion and joy. I don't know how work is sustainable without passion and joy. In my work, in my own professional life. My son, Kieran, came home from university when he was 19, and he said, "Dad, can I ask you a question?" And I was so happy to be asked a question, by a 19-year-old. I said, "Of course, pull up a chair." But the question he asked me was, he said, I have a lot of fun in my life, Dad, but I don't have a lot of joy. What can you tell me about the difference? So I'm conscious that lots of things from the outside look good. I've got lots of friends, I love my sport, I go to the pub, I'm doing okay in uni. So the circumference of me looks okay. But he said, I'm never really quiet, I'm never really peaceful. I don't really feel clear on what I should be doing. And he says, I call that joy. And then he said, is joy a thing we talk to children about? Like Santa Claus, you know. And does growing up mean learning to settle for less? Does growing up mean learning to settle for compromise? And the question has never really left me. And in working with him around this, I've become clearer every year that if you find the thing that gives you joy, that you're good at and that gives joy to other people, don't lose that thing. Because that's the doorway, that's the vehicle, that's the mechanism for you to write the poem with your life that will make the biggest difference in the world. And so that notion of, we hear, I love the water. I'm connected in some way to the water, That's a clue as to who you are and how you will express yourself in the world. And for me, when I work with coaches who have joy and passion, I get a sense of people who are answering questions in that part of their lives that other parts of their lives may not answer. Just connected to a thing that's bigger than themselves, connected to a purpose. And I think that's one of the reasons I love to work with coaches, because I often come to people who are, it's the passion that attracts me. It's the passion that attracts me. I know there are lots of issues, but it's the passion that attracts me into the space.
Thanks, Brandon. We do have time for one question, if anyone would like to ask. No? If not, then, as we all know, the theme for this year's conference is Coaching Better Every Day, Shaping the Future. So can I invite each one of the panelists to just share with us your words of wisdom. For Brandon and Haley, you've not been here long. Only been here a couple of days, still acclimatizing, I think. But we've brought you around to have some of our local food. You've probably seen the sights and sounds and smell of Singapore. We've played football with my son in the lift, 2v2, for which he was happy to say he beat us. Yeah. Small lift, 2v2. Words of wisdom from all of you to our coaches here.
I'm not sure exactly words of wisdom, but I would just say to continually try to get better, because I suppose I'm passionate about that. I think if we don't try to get better, if we don't try to do the best we can, not just for us, but for the people that we coach, then we kind of shouldn't do it. And it's just finding a way for you to figure out how to do that. And it's not the same for everybody. And that's what I was trying to get at yesterday in my keynote, which was, is knowledge, skills and experience, is it enough? Well, I don't know. But you will know. And when you think there's a deficit there, then go and try and solve it. And that will make you better. And it will future-proof you, and it will future-proof the people that you work with, and it will future-proof your sport. And if you can do that, then that's a job well done.
Brandon?
Again, I'm going away more with wisdom than leaving anything behind. I think I've learned a lot from, the conversations and the experience of being here. When people in Brisbane tomorrow ask me, what is it like to work in Singapore? The story that I take with me is a strong one. It's about the people and their commitment to powerful and important things, their graciousness, their professionalism, their intelligence. So I'm taking a strong story back with me from here. And that's thank you. That's thanks to you for that. I'm starting to go pragmatic in my thinking around how will I make the case if I lived here to fund sport differently, so that some of the tensions between the passion and the salary can be resolved. I'm starting to think, how do you show people that Horizon 2, if we're serious about it, should be funded in a way? You're saving the country a truckload of money. If people are better, the health outcomes that you're saving the country, the social outcomes, the disadvantage outcomes that you're saving the country, there must be a way of saying the value add of sport to Singapore beyond medals and the value add to sport in Singapore it could be billions of dollars every year. Give us a bit of that back so that we can maintain the passion, the commitment, the quality, and the learning better every day, the getting better every day. So I'm in my head, as I'm going away, I'm thinking, how would I make that case? The piece of advice I have is that Walt Besser said a long time ago, when you're trying to convince other people of something, you have to convince them in their terms, not in your terms. So you know what I mean? I might be convinced by something, but if the person who's funding something is convinced by something else, my case won't convince them. So the question becomes, who are the decision makers? What decisions do they have to make? And what do they see as convincing? And if you could make the case in those terms, I think you'd be making progress in this area. So I'm not offering words of wisdom, I'm getting tactical. I'm getting strategic, because I think that's, to me, would be the next place I would start to think.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Young.
Okay, I think more towards the local context, the dollar signs. I think this Sasi Kumar mentioned, I think during one of the interviews, Singapore's football league is worth $1 billion. Do you all believe it? Singapore's football league is worth $1 billion. Yeah, import some of the English Premier League over. But I think that is the kind of question that we have to ask ourselves if we want to drive the sports industry forward. So, track and field. Okay, if you have the similar model as swimming, 10, 20 active clubs producing athletes from learn to play all the way up to high performance. There's so many medals at stake for major games. You just need all the service providers to produce 1 or 2 athletes. And if you have 10 clubs that are active, you have 20 active athletes. So I think at the end of the day, it's really, I think the coaching profession needs to be recognized. And I think we have to convince policymakers that it is a worthwhile cause to fund, so that our social integration can evolve and become one. I think most of us are facing this crisis of the diabetes being a major health problem in Singapore. So why can't we use sports as a way to prevent it, and divert some of that funding into sports? So there are many opportunities that sports can be of value to society. Yeah. So as we go along, just imagine the potential of this sports industry is huge. If you look at other models in Japan, UK, US, just the American football alone, it is a big industry. you know. And college football funded my swimming scholarship, like it or not, because they got TV money, you know, and it trickles down to the other sports. So it becomes a win-win situation. I think similar models can actually evolve to a sustainable ecosystem. Yeah, and in the forefront, coaches are needed to drive this at the end.
Thanks, Peng Xiang. Peng Siu.
Yeah, I think from an athlete's perspective, I have two things to share. First of all, when we go back to the topic of passion. Like I said just now, disclaimer, passion does not put food on the table. But then, I have also come to understand that if you are not passionate about something, if you have no drive for something, you will not enjoy it and you won't be good at it. So it's about how to get the two to work hand in hand. Find your passion to make it work for you. And also as an athlete, I find that one thing that I've benefited from under my coaches is that a coach is also a leader. A coach has to be a good leader in order for the team to run well. So it's about when you think of yourself as a coach, you also think of yourself as a leader, bringing people together, how you manage people, how to bring them together to work towards a common goal. And I think that with this in mind, it's a whole new, it's a different level to think about already, and it's something, it's a food for thought. Yeah.
Thanks, Peng Siu. And I'm just going to close with something that I just borrowed from Peng Xiang's slide, your very last slide. Your last slide is, that's all, folks. Which I will say in a short while. But before that, he showed a slide about Charlie Brown and Snoopy, if you recall. So I'm going to use that for just this closing. So in that cartoon, it says, we only die once, but we live every day. So my call to all of you here is that in that every day that we live, let us coach better every day. Can I invite you to put our hands together for our panelists? So there is a photo taking that we need to do. So